there's all this advice. Well, there's the pay gap, right? The wage gap,
Right.
where women earn less than men. And well, it's just because women don't negotiate and don't go out there. But then you see, or women don't, ask for more, and women just go and ask for more. And then you look at the data, and it actually shows that a lot of times a man who goes and asks for a pay raise is just seen as like assertive and good for you. And a woman who does that is seen as pushy. I think I was literally on a board meeting being like, I might pass out. It's those little trade-offs every day. And I think as women, we're always most likely to sacrifice ourselves and our own physical and mental well-being. And that's the hardest part.
Can you really have it all? And so this one was about the power of perspective and the power of words. And the message for me is twofold. One is, and this is very important for women, stop apologizing so much.
It's okay to take up space. I met her on Monday and my son was homesick, and I mentioned, she stopped, she looked at me, she said, "Thank you for being here while he's homesick." And it felt so good.
Right,
and I said, it was
right.
just like, yeah, I'm happy to be here. And like, you see my effort, and that's cool. And then we just move on. I think it goes back to that too. How can we be grateful to ourselves?
Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of Success Unscripted. Today I'm joined by Andrea Spillmann-Gajek, who has been popping up on my LinkedIn feed a lot recently. And I've been so inspired. I feel like she's taking these jumbled up thoughts out of my brain and rearranging them into these poignant observations and life lessons. And I just knew I had to have her on my show. Andrea is a customer success leader, coach, and mommy, and today we talk about how to juggle it all. As always, thanks so much for being here. I'm your host, Sarah Roberts, and you're listening to Success Unscripted. Hi.
Hello. It's lovely to be here. Lovely to talk to you again.
Thanks so much for joining me. It's funny, everybody that I've had on here until you, is somebody that I've already known through work or, growing up. And you, I just kind of want to give some context into how we know each other because we just met and you've been showing up in my LinkedIn feed. And I've just been so inspired by your posts, and you're also a CS leader and you're also a mom. And I was like, I have to talk to this woman. And so I reached out to you, and sure enough, loved you as soon as we started talking. And, but I have so many different questions, a lot of them based off of some of your posts, but really excited to get into some topics around leadership and being a mother in the workplace and work-life balance and all that stuff that really matters. So yes, I'm excited to have you here.
Yeah. And I felt an instant connection when we first talked. So similarly, we I don't have the long background you've had with some of the other folks on here, but I feel an instant kinship. So I'm so excited for our conversation.
Great. So I wanted to start with, and this, you have an interesting headline on LinkedIn, and it feels so appropriate to me because why I've been gravitating towards you is that you find insight and are able to convey wisdom in the smallest observations that most people either wouldn't notice or they would just think is kind of mundane. And so I think this headline is appropriate, and it says solving problems that matter. So wanted to start there. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, I think it's meant different things throughout my career, but I've always gravitated to how can I make the world just a little bit better? And that's taken a lot of different forms. Initially, I studied public health. I had my master's in public health. I thought I was going to go into public health, and I went into technology for public health. That's kind of how I got my start. And I've always gravitated to how do we solve problems that can make people's lives better? And I think technology especially has this big multiplying effect, right? Where the problems we put technology towards change a lot. The technology can, drastically impact how we do things, like get from point A to point B, like order food, and the more we can focus on applying technology or solving problems for people in our bubble, And that kind of makes the world even more unequal. Or we can
Mm-hmm.
think about, how do we get outside of our bubble a little bit? Where can we really impact change? And so to the extent I could in my career, I've tried to focus on companies or organizations that are trying to use technology, not just to make life more convenient, but to really solve problems that can impact, core elements of people's lives and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And now in sort of more consulting and coaching and advising, I focus on the same to the extent I can, either on organizations that are thinking more broadly, but also on supporting leaders that I think bring that perspective to the world.
Yeah. And I mean, I actually wasn't planning to talk too much about customer success today, even though you are a customer success leader, because I think the leadership and mentoring and all of that stuff is, I think, a little bit more meaningful in this context. But yeah, you alluded to this, but you're now an entrepreneur and you have your own business where you're doing some advising and mentoring. And you've mentioned to me that that's really what feels meaningful. And there's also a need for that, especially for women and moms in particular. And you asked the LinkedIn community recently, I want to be able to provide value to my network. What is it that you guys want to hear more of? And overwhelmingly, the response was how to be a female leader.
Yeah.
And there's so much to unpack there. And it's something that's come up in previous episodes. The VP of success and support at Gorgeous, one of my biggest clients, Elise, she talks about how sometimes if you don't see people in a leadership position that look like you and sound like you, it can be difficult to find your own voice or even imagine yourself being in that position. Mm-hmm. So you have done a great job of trying to fill that gap. So what are some of the pieces of advice that you give female leaders?
So first, I think I don't usually start with advice because everyone's situation is different, right? And if you think about, as you have seen from my posts, parenting is my lens on a lot of the world right now.
Yes.
And I think about like being a parent and you get all of this like advice and you're like, I don't know, like, oh my God, there's all this stuff I should be doing. And then eventually you realize that like advice is just a bunch of stuff that you can try on and figure out what works for you and what solves the problem that like you immediately have. And I think the same is there as a leader, although there's less advice. But it's still like you kind of need what's pertinent to you in the moment.
Yeah.
But the one thing I will say, like I have one overarching piece of advice for parents, which is like kind of what I just said, like ignore the advice until it's helpful to you. Mm-hmm. And maybe like the one overarching piece of advice that I would give to female leaders is sort of like trust your own instincts and find yourself and don't over-index on what you think you should be doing. Because of how the world has worked, most leaders have been white middle-aged men.
Yep.
And white middle-aged men, especially in kind of Western culture, have a certain personality type often, especially folks from privileged backgrounds, which, mostly it's folks from privileged backgrounds. So white middle-aged men from privileged backgrounds. And a lot of them have gone to the same schools and have had the same socialization and so have the same personality traits. And we now associate those personality traits with leadership, even though, some of them are probably helpful, but some of them might be harmful, but yet we still associate them with leadership. And probably there's a whole lot of other personality traits that are also really helpful that maybe they don't have, or maybe some way that one person leads, somebody else might lead very differently with the same outcome.
Yeah.
And so kind of taking away this, like, this is what I need to look like to be a leader. I have to look like this. I should do this. I've seen other people do it, so I should do it. And focus on, the same way I tell parents, try on a bunch of advice till you figure out what fits and what solves your immediate challenge. kind of similar thing for female leaders, like try on different styles, try on different things until you figure out kind of what sits right for you and where you can find your own authentic way of being.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. What about differences in negotiation? Because I know you've coached around this in
Yes.
particular,
Yeah.
and I think those dynamics of, you know, perceptions around what a woman should be, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know, the B word, um,
Yep.
not
Yeah.
balance, because I know you said that
The
before
other B
too.
word.
We'll talk about balance later, but I'm
The
talking
other
about
B
the
word.
bad B word.
Yeah.
But like that kind of balance of I'm using that word, of being too assertive, or
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think there are so many different ways that you can go about this, and Sheryl Sandberg did a TED talk on this as well. But how do you think about approaching negotiations as a woman?
So I think there's like different types of negotiations. So you and I think at one point had talked about like negotiating for yourself, like advocating for yourself and your salary and salary increases. And there's all this advice. There's all this, there's like, well, there's the pay gap, right? The wage gap where
Right.
women earn less than men. And well, it's just because women don't negotiate and don't go out there. And then, but then you see, or women don't, ask for more, and like women just go and ask for more. And then you look at the data and it actually shows that a lot of times a man who goes and asks for a pay raise or for a higher role is just seen as like assertive and good for you, and a woman who does that is seen as pushy.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw an article from Harvard Business Review that talked about networking.
Mm.
Men are benefited by networking with men in higher positions, and kind of like social climbing is like a negative way of putting it, but not, right? You benefit from having a broader network and a network of folks who are in higher roles than you. And so the advice is, okay, go do that. But then it turns out that when women do that, they're viewed as assertive, but that's negative. They're too
Mm-hmm.
assertive. And so the advice in the article was like, you just have to signal that you're doing it for the greater good, that you're doing
The
it for the good of the team, that you're
the
doing it
I
for the broader
we.
good. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, gosh, I wish we didn't have to do that, but you kind of do, right? And so there's all of this like, well, women don't use language that undercuts your point. And then you're like, well, but we kind of have to do that a little bit right now, because that's how we become less threatening, less aggressive.
Yep.
And so it's this fine balance, right? Or on one hand, we're trying to change the world so that we can show up in the same way or ask for the same things, and we still have to function in this world,
Right.
right? And so it's sort of how do you balance that? Oh, the other point the article made, though, I'll give it credit because it was a good article. The other point it made was like, well, we need more systems in place, right? So um, how do companies set up networking such that it's just part of how the company works? This is where when we talk about wage negotiation, you shouldn't have to negotiate. So a lot of recruiting I do now, like I when I was hiring within my own companies and supporting a nonprofit now doing the same, you just don't negotiate salary. This is the salary.
Right.
And you start at the highest point that you're willing to go, and you don't go any higher. Same thing with having leveling within companies, just make it
Yep.
really transparent. So I think there's ways also systematically that we can address that, but yeah, it's this fine line.
Yeah. Sheryl Sandberg talks about this too, and I think she calls it like the I we strategy, where you're
Mm-hmm.
not just talking about what do I want and what's good for me, but sitting on the same side of the table, that if you give me this promotion, it will be good for the
Yeah.
company because I will have a inflated title and we'll be able to make a bigger impact with customers, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may be. But having to, like you said, like, in order to change the world, we need to operate within it and then get to those positions of power and then make those changes, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of a chicken or the egg kind of question.
Exactly.
And I want to talk about motherhood specifically because there you posted last year, about a year ago, when Serena Williams
Mhm.
retired from tennis because she wanted to focus on her family. And she said, I didn't want to have to choose between my career and family. And you said, sometimes we make gut-wrenching choices to sacrifice something so that we don't accidentally lose everything. And as women, we do have to make that trade-off, because a lot of times, even if we're in a dual income household, the woman is still seen as the main caretaker. And they've done a ton of studies that show that women do more housework and they do more childcare. And in my case, my husband is extremely supportive and, I mean, does at least half of everything.
Mhm.
But there are still those moments where I'm mom and she
Yeah.
needs me more than him because she's two, and because I'm her mom and I breastfed her for an entire year. And, I am home for her more so than him.
Mhm.
And that's just the way it is. So do you feel like you've had to make sacrifices? And what has that experience as a working mom been for you?
Yeah, it's hard. I think the thing I sacrificed the most, especially when I was in full-time executive roles, was myself.
Mm,
So I remember taking a business trip. So I was, led customer success. So I would, pre-pandemic especially, it was all about the FaceTime with the customers, right? You have an enterprise customer, go see them, get on a plane, go see them. And before having a kid, I could I could, it was no big deal. I'd just hop on a plane. I'd
right.
maybe travel for 48 hours, come home. It was great. Go back to the office. Nothing to coordinate, nothing to organize. And then I had a kid, and I was cutting those 48 or 72-hour trips down to like 36 hours so that I could
Mm,
be back. At that point, I had a 9-month-old. I'm trying to like pump and find the pumping rooms and
something.
getting this is part of it. I'm sorry, this is oversharing, but like getting clogged ducts because I'm trying to pump on the
Yeah.
go and not giving enough time, and like organize. And so there's all of this extra pressure around the trip.
Yes.
Meanwhile, I'm sleep deprived because the kid is waking up still at night. And I remember coming home from one of those trips and almost passing out at my desk. And luckily, I had picked a company pre-pandemic that had uh, that enabled us to work from home a few days a week. So it was like hybrid work before that was popular. Super supportive company. It was one of my work from home days, and I was able to just like go lie down.
Hmm.
And I was like, shoot, I can't do this. Like I can't, I don't physically have like the energy reserves, and I need to be a little bit more careful of how I am budget. Like I have to actually budget my energy now.
Yeah.
So I think that was a big moment for me. I think the good part, or how I've always approached family, work, life balance, all of that, is like it is always a balancing act, and you are never going to get it right. And so I've just tried to be really aware of like feedback loops and inputs and be like, all right, gotta adjust a little bit. And so in
Hmm.
that moment, I adjusted a little bit. I forget what we did, but I was like, all right, maybe I need to take a little bit longer for trips. Maybe I need to prioritize my sleep before and after. Maybe
Right.
I need to not have such a packed day. I think I was on a board call too. I think I was literally on a board meeting being like, I might pass out.
Yeah.
And I need to not do this, right? So that's also like the extra pressure. Maybe I shouldn't have a trip 2 days before a board meeting when I'm also going to have a lot of prep to do for that board meeting.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I don't like, it's those little trade-offs every day. And I think as women, we're always most likely to sacrifice ourselves and our own
Mhm.
physical and mental well-being. And that's the hardest part. I'm still not good at that. I'm still not good at not doing that.
Yeah. And not that it ever goes away, the pressure and the exhaustion and all of that, but it was really a wake up call for me when I first had Maddie, it was in the first 6 weeks or something, and I was breastfeeding, and I nursed the entire, we ended up having there was an issue with my milk where like we didn't realize until several months in that it was like turning rancid as soon as I would pump, and we were trying to feed her this
My
bottle and she was like,
goodness.
no, because it was so
Mm-hmm.
disgusting. And I tried it once and it was like, I can't believe I've been trying to like torture my child. So anyway, so it was like, I mean, for an entire year, thank God I had the supply because she would not take a bottle. And I didn't realize that breastfeeding, I think it takes even more calories than pregnancy. And I'll never forget, my sister was here. Maddie was about 6 weeks old, and she was on a changing table, and all of a sudden I got so dizzy and I almost passed out. And thank God my sister was in the room. So she was able to make sure that she didn't fall off the changing table, which could be fatal. And around that time as well, like just going from like my bed to the bathroom, like I would get so exhausted, like like pure exhaustion. And they did all these tests, and my doctor was like, yeah, you just need to eat more. And it's such a miracle, and it's so incredible pregnancy. And then if you are nursing afterwards as well, like, but it takes so much. And in a lot of the research that I've done around like the pay gap, or women not getting promoted as much and not being in leadership, a lot of it is around women self-selecting out of those promotions.
Yeah.
Because they do want to be a mom. And it's like, and that's the hard thing. And I don't think anybody's figured it out. And can you really have it all? And I think that looks different for everybody, for each person. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to become an entrepreneur, because I knew that there was no way that I could take care of myself and a child and work for somebody else and be beholden to their schedule. There's just no way, because I need that extra time to sleep or take a bath, or like if I'm on the verge of a panic attack, like I have to have control over just like self-soothing. But yeah, I mean, so in your case, you said you made some adjustments. I don't know. I mean, do you have any, I guess I don't know because there isn't any answer to this, right?
Well,
But
I
like,
think it's a
how do you
math problem, right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, it is a math problem. I remember someone saying to me when I had a 5-month-old, I had just gone back to work again with my first, and I was talking to a guy, and he was like, "Oh, how's it going?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's making it work. It's hard. It's hard." He's like, "Yeah, I did my MBA while I was working, and so I'm sure it's not the same, but like I get it." And I'm like, "No, you don't. You don't, because the thing is, like, it's one thing to do something on the side of work that you can control, right? You
Yeah.
can decide how many hours you're going to spend. You can be more efficient. You can do it at 80%. Parenting, you can't be efficient at. Like, there's just a certain number of hours your kid needs, and there is a certain number of hours that you have to actually rest at a certain point, or you will not function. And I think you manage during parenthood to bring that number down, but you still need that.
Well, there's surprises too. Like they get sick all the time.
Always. Well, and so that's the thing, right? A lot of companies are like, well, and I've had amazing managers. I've usually reported into the CEO, the COO, who are always like, "Oh, your kid's sick, no problem. Like, go pick them up. We can skip our one-on-one, move things around. Like, I know you'll get it all done." And I'm like, "But when?" Like, yeah, I'll get it all done, but like when? I now lost 3 hours of work today because I went to pick my kid up and take them to the doctor and come home with them, and they need me. And now they're also going to be up all night. I'm catching whatever they have. So I'm now sick too. Like, when do I have the time to make up the work that I didn't do? I don't. Like, I just don't have that time. So either a deadline has to slip or somebody else has to help.
Right.
But especially in startups, in VC backed startups where you're trying to
Yeah.
grow 2x or 3x per year, there's very little like wiggle room. You don't really have
There's
much.
nobody to cover for you.
There's no one to cover for you. The teams are small.
Yep.
And you can't really just push deadlines. Everything has to happen like yesterday. And so that's, I mean,
Yeah.
and that's where I say it's a math problem, right? There's a certain number of hours in the day. Kids need a certain amount of that time. Stuff comes up. We're looking at moving to Switzerland, in fact. So part of this is just,
I thought that was a done deal.
It's pretty much a done deal. Yeah. It's pretty much a done deal. And I've been talking to a lot of folks there, and most people I talk to are like, yeah, not most people, a lot of people I talk to are like, yeah, we work 80%. We have kids, we work 80%.
We
and
work
so,
80%. What does that mean?
Like they work 4 days a week instead of 5 days a week.
Oh.
So I talked, and someone I was just introduced to, she's like, yeah, my husband and I both work 4 days a week. Maybe we have less childcare, maybe. And so.
And do they typically, and I don't know if you have the answer to this question, but is it typically like they both take off the same day or they take off different days?
I don't know. And I do know there's a whole other dynamic in Switzerland where it's like kind of made for the woman to be home, and like the childcare gaps are kind of real, and we're still figuring all of this out. But what was really interesting to me is like, well, you kind of need, as a parent, I think it would be great if there were more options here in the US where you can still have an impactful job, but say, I'm going to do this at 80% time,
Yeah.
and like actually have that 80% time respected. I've talked to a lot of people who want to do that, but are worried that if they work 80%, they're going to get paid 80%, but still work 100%. But I don't know, that's hard to do. I've seen job sharing, but I haven't seen that happen a lot.
Yeah.
But I think at the end of the day, I don't have a solution other than looking at the math problems of how do you reduce the number of hours that people need to spend.
I mean, I think the biggest thing is just a shift in culture around the husband picking up 50% of the childcare and the housework.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. And I do think that culturally we're moving in that direction. And you see, sometimes there are stay-at-home dads, and I know a lot of men that take pride in being a father and stepping up.
Yeah.
Although even as I'm talking about it, I'm using the word stepping up.
Right.
As if that's an amazing
let's celebrate them.
Yeah, like, yay, you're doing as much work as we are. But I mean, at the same time, like that, we need that, so right. I do want to celebrate it. But so when we had Maddie, I worked for myself, and this was when things were still really busy and the recruiting market was really hot, and I had a ton of searches. I went back to work and was breastfeeding around the clock, which was really challenging. But I went back to work 7 weeks after having her because I was like, I need to do these searches, and I don't get maternity leave. I don't get paid for not working. And he had 6 months off. And so he was like the primary caregiver. And then it evened out when we were both working. But I will say, as a entrepreneur where I don't have to ask for time off, I am kind of the default now most of the time if she's sick, or taking her to this like creative explorations that we have once a week where the parent goes with her to the preschool and so I'm curious, as you've moved from working for somebody else to working for yourself, has your dynamic changed with your partner around who's the primary default caregiver when they get sick or whatever?
Yeah, sort of. And it's conscious. Right. So, first, like you said, a couple things that I just want to pick up on, which like you mentioned so first of all, when you were starting to tell that, you told the story like a little while back about being so dizzy while you were changing your daughter's diaper
Yeah.
because you need to eat more and all this. And I'm just when you were telling that story, I'm like, and so many women are already back at work at 6 weeks, right? Like,
Yeah.
data shows that it negatively impacts both the mother's health and the baby's health for moms to go back before like 6 to 9 months. And yet, we don't have that support. And I'm lucky enough to live in
Yeah.
California, where even as an entrepreneur, I would get paid state disability, although I was in a company that was paying me great maternity leave while I took my 3 months.
Mm.
And then my husband took time off after that. He took his full paternity leave too, right? So that helped a lot. So I think a couple things that I think are really important, and I don't know, I think I'll get to answering the question directly, but it's like, I think there's foundation here that you touched on that I really want to call out. One is, I think the father or the non-birth parent or the non-default parent taking leave and being a full-time parent for a bit is so important, not just to support the parent who has been default and is now back at work, and not just for the child so that you don't have to send a baby into daycare or nanny at 3 months, but also because they gain a new understanding of all the things that have to go on. And it makes it so much easier to then split stuff later, is what I found. I don't know if this was similar for you, because you've talked about having that split.
Yeah.
So that helped a lot. And I don't know, and there's still like the default parent stuff that happens. You mentioned your 2-year-old just kind of wants you sometimes. And for me, it's that we pick the kids up at 4:30 and I pick them up because I'm working part-time. And that was a conscious decision that I made because I want to spend more time with them. And then they're just like on top of me, like literally so many times I have the 5-year-old on one knee and the 1-year-old on the other knee, because if one wants my attention, they both do. And they're just like physically on top of me.
Maddie like always needs to be helped. She's so cute. She always goes, "Mommy, carry you? Mommy, carry you?" Because she doesn't have the pronouns right.
Yeah.
Oh, and I just
right. And we love that. And you're gonna miss it, and everyone tells you you're gonna miss it. And so, but you still need a break sometimes.
Right.
So you asked about like default parenting and if I just naturally pick up more now that I'm the entrepreneur and have a more flexible schedule. And like, yes. And also that was the deal that I sort of came to my husband with, was kind of like, look, I'm going to try this out. It means I'll be more flexible. It actually means, but I schedule things. Like I schedule to go to the gym twice a week. I schedule physical therapy. And if stuff happens in those windows, if I can move it, great. But if not, my husband's going to go pick up the kid if something happens. This morning I had a meeting from 8 to 9:30 that had been really hard to schedule. And so he dropped both kids off. Normally I drop off the baby. So I think it's like we just still have to communicate. And he's been luckily like really respectful of the fact that being an entrepreneur, I'm not just like putting my feet up and doing nothing.
Right.
Like I'm doing work and I need time for that. And I try to recognize that he's our stability right now. Our benefits are through him. Like he's taking on more hours. And so to the extent I can, so I think it's just like, I don't know, maybe that service mentality in marriage. Like, how do I help you? How do I make your life better? Has helped us a bit, but it's still hard. It's like really hard.
Yeah, it's really hard. And my husband, he pays our mortgage and he has the benefits, and, especially because things were really slow last year. And it's, as an entrepreneur, it is hard, especially if the money isn't coming as regularly or as much as it would if you are a W-2. I don't know. Sometimes I even feel bad advocating for myself, or, what's challenging now is I'm starting to invest in help for the podcast, because the market is starting to return and there's just no way I could do my recruiting business and the podcast full time. There's just no way. So I'm starting to put that infrastructure in place, but then investing in myself in something
Mm.
that isn't yet lucrative. It's kind of this mind fuck, to be honest. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's just sometimes hard to have that faith in yourself, which I mean, as an
Mm.
entrepreneur, you have to, you're always putting yourself out there. But I want to change to a little bit of a pivot to a positive note. The biggest thing that I've gravitated towards when it comes to you and your posts on LinkedIn, which is how I found you, is a lot of your posts are through this lens of your children, and it's almost like you're seeing the world through their eyes in this kind of with a sense of wonder. And
Mm.
my first post where I was like, I gotta talk to this woman, was the post about when you were making a cake, and your son is obsessed with those cooking, cake baking shows, and he was like, Mommy, let's do it. And you had a photo of the like car or whatever that you guys made. It's so cute. And you guys are doing your best and you're YouTubing things, and I think you dropped the cake at one point, and so you have this thing that it looks like a car, but yeah, it's a little rough around the edges, and it's got its little Oreo wheels, and your reaction was like, oh my God, this looks terrible. And you look at him and he goes, Mommy, I love it. And it was in that moment that you realized that you were holding yourself to the expectation of, these are the people we're watching on TV, and these professional bakers are making these masterpieces. And so if my cake doesn't look like this masterpiece, then I must have failed. Whereas your son just wanted to bake a cake with you, maybe eat a little bit of frosting. And so it was that, and it was just so, and this is, I mean, and I'm getting chills just thinking about it. And this is what your gift of being able to take these experiences that you have and then make them so meaningful and poignant, because time and time again, in my conversations with high achievers, we're high achievers for a reason. And it's because we hold ourselves to those standards. But there's also this, it's so important to step back. And I think you talk about focusing on the things that you did right. And I have to remind myself of that all the time, is like,
Yeah.
what am I, even if it's the small thing, even if it's just getting the damn podcast out there when it's terrifying, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I keep trying to remind myself, like, as long as each episode is better than the last one in some way, I'm winning. As long as somebody's finding value in this, I'm winning. But how do you kind of shift your mindset to be more supportive and self-loving?
I think I saw someone else post the other day, like, let's give ourselves the same grace we give other people, or something like that, the same support. The car that we baked, like the cake baking fiasco / success story, um, for me was more like, understand what outcomes matter. Um, and like, don't focus too much on the stuff that doesn't, even though I am a perfectionist. And I think this is so true in startups too. I remember getting really frustrated in startups, and some of this is like the 80-20 rule. I questioned if I should even be in startups, because I remember, I don't know, giving a customer presentation and being like, oh, that slide wasn't quite perfect, or like, really wish we'd practiced that more. But you can't, like, you just don't have that time. And sometimes you just have to get stuff done. And so I think it's that what actually matters, right? In the case of like a client presentation or a client meeting that we were having, what mattered was that we showed up. What mattered was that we listened. What mattered was that we talked to the client's value. What didn't matter was having the most beautiful consulting style deck. Like, yeah, it has to look professional. It can't look like, our 10-year-old did it, although actually 10-year-olds are probably better at PowerPoint at this point than I am.
Yeah, these
But
days.
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you can't, I as a, in a startup in a small team, couldn't compare myself to McKinsey or to, the
Right.
really big companies
that
that
have the
have
resources and support.
that have a whole team just dedicated to making decks.
Right.
And so the same thing in making this cake with my son. Like, it didn't matter that the cake was ugly. What mattered was the experience of it. What mattered was that it was a cake he made. What mattered was that he got to eat a lot of frosting. And so I think in being kind, and I did this a lot. I used to do a lot of performing. I used to do a lot of theater and a lot of singing. And I would always come out of these performances and be like, oh my God, I didn't quite hit that note right. Yep. I didn't quite do this right. Or I didn't quite. And meanwhile, people would be coming up to me and being like, oh my gosh, that was so, that song was so powerful. Or like, I get a lot of old ladies being like, will you sing at my funeral? And I'm like, oh my God, this is so weird. But like,
that's so funny. You've had more than one person ask.
This was like a common thing across multiple places. Well, because I did some like singing in churches and stuff. And
that's
so
very strange.
It was, it took a lot of getting used to, and especially the fact that it like kept happening. But my point is like I had to like reset my expectations. Like, okay, I'm not a professional performer. I'm not going to rehearse 4 hours a day, but it's good enough for what's needed here, which is connecting with people, which is, having a performance that was like good enough that people would want to sit through it and it would resonate. Right. So I think it's just that. It's just coming back to like, well, what's the actual goal here rather than what are all of the things that I didn't do well enough? It's more just, what's the goal? Did I accomplish that? Yep. Okay. What can I do better next time? Sure. But also, what did I accomplish?
Yeah. I mean, it's all about a change in perspective, right? And this brings me to my other favorite post. I just have to call these out because they're just magic to me. You talk about your son building a fairy village outside of your house, and it's in this shared space, this grassy area, and you wanted to make sure that nobody knocked it down too early because you wanted it to, stay up for a little while. And so you originally wrote a note that said, please indulge my son, leave it up for a bit. We'll clean it up. If it's a pain, call me. And then you thought about it and you kind of ripped up the note and you rewrote it. And instead you put up a note that said, we hope this temporary exhibit by Rafa brings some magic to your day. And you got all of these thank you notes. And so this one was about the power of perspective and the power of words. And I think about the message for me is twofold. One is, and this is very important for women, stop apologizing so much. And I really try to catch myself, even if it's, I have to, for instance, this one comes up all the time. If I have to reschedule a call, I try not to say, oh, I'm so sorry. Especially if I'm speaking with a man or writing to a man.
Yeah.
I try not to say, oh, I'm so sorry for the inconvenience. I'll say, thank you in advance for your flexibility or something like that. So how are you, and much like this sign, how are you projecting to the rest of the world, I think is really important. But I think too, and it's related to the last concept with the, perfectionism and being okay with, a work in progress, is how are you talking to yourself? And I had a turning point in like 2018. I was just coming off of a really hard year and I was changing my medication, and I had a like therapist coach who would ask me, what are the things that you're saying to yourself when you look in the mirror? And I really started paying attention to that and tried to start changing how I was speaking to myself. And then started noticing, even when I was younger, when I was, a kid, I would go to sleep trying to review my day and all the things that I did wrong that I could have done better. And no doubt that helped me improve in a lot of ways. And there's nothing wrong with seeing where your gaps are and what can you change and make better. But it's that focusing on the positives and the wins, because I think we are taught if we want to achieve this thing, then you have to keep up leveling. You have to keep getting better and keep getting better. And that's important, but it's not the only thing that's important.
Well, I think more we're just always taught, don't mess up, you're not good enough, right?
Right.
Or we hear that a lot. And it's a very real thing. There's been research on this too, that if a woman or a person of color messes up, makes a mistake at work, it's viewed much more negatively.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we hold ourselves to that standard, right? We look at like, well, what's wrong? Whereas really the focus should be on, yeah, let's get better, but like that was good enough too. Like, let's just do stuff. It's okay to take up space, right? That's the other thing. We're often told, make yourself small. Don't inconvenience anybody. That's where I think like the thank you instead of the apology, we're like conditioned. I'm sorry for taking up space. But it actually feels so much better from the other side when you say thank you. I was catching up with a former colleague and a friend, Divya Ramachandran. She's a fantastic coach as well. I met her on Monday and my son was homesick. And I mentioned, oh yeah, Rafa's homesick. And she stopped, she looked at me, she said, thank you for being here while he's homesick. She didn't say, oh, you shouldn't have come. Oh, we could have rescheduled. Oh, we could have. And it felt so good. If she had started with like, oh, you shouldn't have been here. Oh, you shouldn't. I would have been like, no, it's okay. Right. And then you sort of were like, no, it's okay. Let me make you feel better about me being here.
Right.
And instead it was just like, yeah, I'm happy to be here. And like, you see my effort and that's cool. And then we just move on. Right. Like it feels good from the other side too. When you just acknowledge, you say, hey, like, I appreciate it. Right.
That's something that my husband is so good at. Is he always thanks me. Sometimes it's a little much, and then I feel like I have to thank for. But it's a good practice, and I think it's one of the reasons why we have such a strong marriage. Is like, I mean, if I unload the dishwasher every single time, hey babe, thanks for unloading the dishwasher, and every single time. Thank you for doing the laundry. Thank you for folding. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Thank you. And I think that's it's such a blessing for me because being a mother is a thankless job. And I don't think you should expect your kids you should teach them to say thank you, but you shouldn't expect them to appreciate what you do as a parent. You're making that choice to be a parent. They'll get it if they become a parent in the future or when they go off to college and realize all the stuff that you've been doing for them.
Yeah.
But like, that's not the point of having a kid. But I feel so appreciated all the time from him because he notices all of those little things. And so, yeah, unsolicited advice for marriage.
The value of gratitude. I think it's huge, right? And that relates to company culture as well. There's, grateful organizations do better. People do better when their work is appreciated. I was going to say recognized, but it's less even recognized than just appreciated. And you were, I relate that back to where we sort of started this discussion, which is your own internal monologue and what you tell yourself. And I think it goes back to that too. How can we be grateful to ourselves?
Yeah. And that's a muscle that I've been told by, various therapists or coaches that I should be doing. And, you try to think of what are your wins that day and write them down, or like, what are 5 things that you're good at, and I'm so bad. I always like avoid those exercises, but I think it's hard to remember and to give yourself that praise.
Yeah.
But it's important because it's those little things that are not maybe what's making you money or that is going to get you the award that really make you who you are and make you a valuable human to the people in your life.
Yeah, just the little everyday practices. And I agree, it is really hard, isn't it, to be grateful to ourselves?
Yes.
Yeah. Say, well, thank you, self, for taking that time to go to the gym today, or for having that extra piece of toast when you were hungry, or
Yeah.
drinking enough water, for, right. And even all of those things I call out are like physical, taking care of ourselves. What's the mental? And it's
Yeah.
important. I don't know that I think it's really hard to do well.
Yeah.
It's easier to be grateful to other people.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, I have a million other things I wanted to ask, but I really kind of like that as an ending point because it's positive and
Yeah.
I'm just I'm so grateful to you for being here, but also like, gosh, I think my favorite thing about having started this podcast and this journey I'm on is that I'm connecting more deeply with people that I wouldn't have connected with otherwise.
Mm.
And so I'm grateful that the universe has brought us together and I'm grateful to myself. Let me practice here
There you
for
go.
having the courage to reach out and say, "Hey, you're amazing. Can we chat?"
Well, I'm grateful to you as well. Like, yeah, this is lovely. I'm honored that I am the first sort of non person from your history, I
Yeah.
guess. That to have had this place of honor. And also really grateful that, posting frequently on LinkedIn is very new for me. Talk about like taking up space. I'm like, I don't
Oh,
want
it's
people to
so
like
hard.
see
Yeah.
my name too much. Like, are people going to be annoyed to like see a bunch of posts from me? Like, I
I'm
don't have
not.
anything to say. Who's going to criticize me for doing it? Right. There's all of these like
Yes.
internal monologues. And I saw a lot of people recently being like, look, I'm really grateful I started posting because I connected to more people, because I've had great discussions, because I'm like, all right, I'm going to try it.
Yeah.
And so thank you for making my foray into being more present on LinkedIn so positive. I'm so glad
Yeah.
that, if even the only thing that came out of that is that you and I got to connect and we got to have this conversation, that will have been worth it for me. But I am seeing a lot more people kind of emerge that I'm like, oh, I'm so glad we can reconnect or connect, or,
Yeah.
that's what matters. So, but thank you for being so positive and for reaching out and for connecting and for this podcast. I've loved getting to listen to some of your previous episodes. So thank you. You have a talent. You have a way of getting to the kind of core of people's experience, or what people can bring out, what's interesting about people, and bringing that up, and then listening and asking really smart questions that you're like, oh,
Oh,
I'm learning so much from this person.
oh,
So
well,
thank you for all you do.
yeah, I'm glad that you're finding value in it. And that's why I started, really, is because it's like, I'm talking to all these really interesting people all the time. And I think people need to hear it,
Mm.
and why not help people learn the way that I'm learning rather than me like telling people stuff, like just share these conversations. So that's what it's been. But yeah, it's been a journey. It's a learning curve. Like I said, I think, as long as I'm improving with every episode, but yeah, it's like, it definitely sometimes is cringeworthy. But I did you read that Time of the Year article on Taylor Swift?
No, I haven't yet.
Oh, it's really good. It's worth a read. But my
Okay.
favorite part, and I don't know, it's possible that Taylor Swift herself said this, but I think it was just the author was talking
Mhm.
about her basically reliving her childhood on this global
Mm.
stage, going through these eras. And the message was, don't hate the cringeworthy part of you. Hate the part that cringes.
Oh, I love that. Oh, I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. But it takes a lot of courage to post on LinkedIn all the time. It takes a lot of courage to put a podcast out there. And you wrote about that one where you're like, I just posted something that totally fell flat, and that happens, it's part of
Yeah.
it. But if you're not putting yourself out there and like doing the thing that feels cringeworthy, then you're not
Hmm.
going to learn, you're not going to grow. So yeah, I applaud you for that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
And
look
same.
forward to learning more from you and to hearing how Switzerland goes. And,
Yeah.
next time you come on here, you'll be one of those old friends of mine. So
Fantastic. I love that. I love that. And yeah, let's like definitely stay connected. I'm going to keep listening to your podcast for sure, because I've already learned so much from it.
I love it.
And obviously let me know how I can continue to support you, right? As women entrepreneurs, got to stick together.